In the small office which Lord Darcy and his staff had been assigned while conducting the investigation, 3 men watched while a 4th conducted a demonstration on a table in the centre of the room. Master Sean O'Loughlin held up an intricately engraved gold button with an arabesque pattern and a diamond set in the centre. He looked at the other 3. "Now, my lord, your reverence and colleague doctor, I call your attention to this button." Dr. Pateley smiled and Father Bright looked stern. Lord Darcy merely stuffed tobacco, imported from the southern New England counties on the Gulf, into a German-made porcelain pipe. He allowed Master Sean a certain amount of flamboyance. Good sorcerers were hard to come by. "Will you hold the robe, Dr. Pateley? Thank you. Now stand back. That's it. Thank you. Now, I place the button on the table a good 10 feet from the robe." Then he muttered something under his breath and dusted a bit of powder on the button. He made a few passes over it with his hands, paused, and looked up at Father Bright. "If you will, Reverend Sir." Father Bright solemnly raised his right hand and, as he made the sign of the cross, said, "May this demonstration, O God, be in strict accord with the truth, and may the evil one not in any way deceive us who are witnesses thereto. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen." "Amen," the other 3 chorused. Master Sean crossed himself, then muttered something under his breath. The button leaped from the table, slammed itself against the robe which Dr. Pateley held before him, and stuck there, as though it had been sewn on by an expert. "Ha!" said Master Sean. "As I thought." He gave the other 3 men a broad, beaming smile. The 2 were definitely connected. Lord Darcy looked bored. "Time?" he asked. "In a moment, my lord," Master Sean said apologetically. "In a moment." While the other 3 watched, the sorcerer went through more spells with the button and the robe, although none were quite so spectacular as the first demonstration. Finally, Master Sean said, "About 11:30 last night they were torn apart, my lord. But I shouldn't like to make it any more definite than to say between 11 and midnight. The speed with which it returned to its place shows that it was ripped off very rapidly, however." "Very good," said Lord Darcy. "Now the bullet, if you please." "Yes, my lord. This will have to be a bit different." He took more paraphernalia out of his large, symbol-decorated carpet bag. "The law of contagion, gently born sirs, is a tricky thing to work with. If a man doesn't know how to handle it, he can get himself killed. We had an apprentice of the guild back in Cork who might have made a good sorcerer in time. He had the talent. Unfortunately, he didn't have the good sense to go with it. According to the law of contagion, any 2 objects which have ever been in contact with each other have an affinity for each other, which is directly proportional to the product of the degree of relevancy of the contact and the length of time they were in contact, and inversely proportional to the length of time since they have ceased to be in contact." He gave a smiling glance to the priest. "That doesn't apply strictly to relics of the saints, Reverend Sir. There's another factor enters in there, as you know." As he spoke, the sorcerer was carefully clamping the little handgun into the padded vise, so that its barrel was parallel to the surface of the table. "Anyhow," he went on, "this apprentice, all on his own, decided to get rid of the cockroaches in his house. A simple thing, if one knows how to go about it. So he collected dust from various cracks and crannies about the house, dust which contained, of course, the drop-ins of the pests. The dust, with the appropriate spells and ingredients, he boiled. It worked fine. The roaches all came down with a raging fever and died. Unfortunately, the clumsy lad had poor laboratory technique. He allowed 3 drops of his own perspiration to fall into the steaming pot over which he was working, and the resultant fever killed him too. By this time he had put the bullet which Dr. Paley had removed from the Count's body on a small pedestal, so that it was exactly in line with the muzzle of the gun. "There now," he said softly. Then he repeated the incantation and the powdering that he had used on the button. As the last syllable was formed by his lips, the bullet vanished with a ping. In its vise, the little gun vibrated. "Ah," said Master Sean. "No question there, eh? That's the death weapon, all right, my lord. Yes, time's almost exactly the same as that of the removal of the button. Not more than a few seconds later. Forms a picture, don't it, my lord? His lordship, the Count, jerks a button off the girl's gown. She outs with a gun and plugs him." Lord Darcy's handsome face scowled. "Let's not jump to any hasty conclusions, my good Sean. There is no evidence whatever that he was killed by a woman." "Would a man be wearing that gown, my lord?" "Possibly," said Lord Darcy. "But who says that anyone was wearing it when the button was removed?" "Oh." Master Sean subsided into silence. Using a small ramrod, he forced the bullet out of the chamber of the little pistol. "Father Bright," said Lord Darcy, "will the Countess be serving tea this afternoon?" The priest looked suddenly contrite. "Good heavens! None of you has eaten yet. I'll see that something is sent up right away, Lord Darcy. In the confusion—" Lord Darcy held up a hand. "I beg your pardon, Father. That wasn't what I meant. I'm sure Master Sean and Dr. Paley would appreciate a little something, but I can wait until tea time. What I was thinking was that perhaps the Countess would ask her guests to tea. Does she know Laird and Lady Duncan well enough to ask for their sympathetic presence on such an afternoon as this?" Father Bright's eyes narrowed a trifle. "I dare say it could be arranged, Lord Darcy. You will be there?" "Yes, but I may be a trifle late. That will hardly matter at an informal tea." The priest glanced at his watch. 4 o'clock? "I should think that would do it," said Lord Darcy. Father Bright nodded wordlessly and left the room. Dr. Paley took off his pince-nez and polished the lenses carefully with a silk handkerchief. "How long will your spell keep the body incorrupt, Master Sean?" he asked. "As long as it's relevant. As soon as the case is solved, or we have enough data to solve the case, as the case may be, he'll start to go. I'm not a saint, you know. It takes powerful motivation to keep a body incorrupt for years and years." Sir Pierre was eyeing the gown that Paley had put on the table. The button was still in place, as if held there by magnetism. He didn't touch it. "Master Sean, I don't know much about magic," he said, "but can't you find out who was wearing this robe just as easily as you found out that the button matched?" Master Sean wagged his head in a firm negative. "No, sir. 'Tisn't relevant, sir. The relevancy of the integrated dress as a whole is quite strong. So is that of the seamstress or tailor who made the garment, and that of the weaver who made the cloth. But except in certain circumstances, the person who wears or wore the garment has little actual relevancy to the garment itself." "I'm afraid I don't understand," said Sir Pierre, looking puzzled. "Look at it like this, sir. That gown wouldn't be what it is if the weaver hadn't made the cloth in that particular way. It wouldn't be what it is if the seamstress hadn't cut it in a particular way and sewed it in a specific manner. You follow, sir? Yes, well then, the connections between garment and weaver and garment and seamstress are strongly relevant. But this dress would still be pretty much what it is if it had stayed in the closet instead of being worn. No relevance, or very little. Now, if it were a well-worn garment, that would be different. That is, if it had always been worn by the same person. Then, you see, sir, the garment as a whole is what it is because of the wearing, and the wearer becomes relevant. He pointed at the little handgun he was still holding in his hand. Now, you take your gun here, sir. It isn't my gun, Sir Pierre interrupted firmly. I was speaking rhetorically, sir, said Master Sean with infinite patience. This gun, or any other gun in general, if you see what I mean, sir. It's even harder to place the ownership of a gun. Most of the wear on a gun is purely mechanical. It doesn't matter who pulls the trigger, you see. The erosion by the gases produced in the chamber, and the wear caused by the bullet passing through the barrel will be the same. You see, sir, 'tisn't relevant to the gun who pulled its trigger or what it's fired at. The bullet's a slightly different matter. To the bullet, it is relevant which gun it was fired from and what it hit. All these things simply have to be taken into account, Sir Pierre. I see, said the knight. Very interesting, Master Sean. Then he turned to Lord Darcy. Is there anything else, your lordship? There's a great deal of county business to be attended to. Lord Darcy waved a hand. Not at the moment, Sir Pierre. I understand the pressures of government. Go right ahead. Thank you, your lordship. If anything further should be required, I shall be in my office. As soon as Sir Pierre had closed the door, Lord Darcy held out his hand toward the sorcerer. Master Sean, the gun. Master Sean handed it to him. Ever seen one like this before? He asked, turning it over in his hands. Not exactly like it, my lord. Come, Sean, don't be so cautious. I am no sorcerer, but I don't need to know the laws of similarity to be able to recognize an obvious similarity. Edinburgh, said Master Sean flatly. Exactly. Scottish work. The typical Scot gold work, remarkable beauty. And look at that lock. It has Scots written all over it, and more. Edinburgh, as you said. Dr. Pateley, having replaced his carefully polished glasses, leaned over and peered at the weapon in Lord Darcy's hand. Couldn't it be Italian, my lord, or Moorish? In Moorish Spain they do work like that. No Moorish gunsmith would put a hunting scene on the butt, Lord Darcy said flatly, and the Italians wouldn't have put heather and thistles in the fields surrounding the huntsman. But the FDM engraved on the barrel, said Dr. Pateley, indicates the Ferrari of Milan, said Lord Darcy. Exactly. But the barrel is of much newer work than the rest. So are the chambers. This is a fairly old gun. 50 years old, I'd say. The lock and the butt are still in excellent condition, indicating that it has been well cared for. But frequent usage, or a single accident, could ruin the barrel and require the owner to get a replacement. It was replaced by a Ferrari. I see, said Dr. Pateley, somewhat humbled. If we open the lock, Master Sean, hand me a small screwdriver. Thank you. If we open the lock, we will find the name of one of the finest gunsmiths of half a century ago, a man whose name has not yet been forgotten. Hamish Graw of Edinburgh. Ah, there, you see. They did. Having satisfied himself on that point, Lord Darcy closed the lock again. Now, men, we have the gun located. We also know that a guest in this very castle is Laird Duncan of Duncan, the Duncan of Duncan himself, a Scots laird who was, 15 years ago, His Majesty's Minister Plenipotentiary to the Free Grand Duchy of Milan. That suggests to me that it would be indeed odd if there were not some connection between Laird Duncan and this gun, eh? Come, come, Master Sean, said Lord Darcy rather impatiently. We haven't all the time in the world. Patience, my lord, patience, said the little sorcerer calmly. Can't hurry these things, you know. He was kneeling in front of a large, heavy travelling chest in the bedroom of the guest apartment, occupied temporarily by Laird and Lady Duncan, working with the lock. One position of a lock is just as relevant as the other, so you can't work with the bolt. But the pin tumblers in the cylinder now, that's a different matter. A lock's built so that the breaks in the tumblers are not related to the surface of the cylinder when the key is out. But there is a relation when the key's in. So, by taking advantage of that relevancy, the lock clicked open. Lord Darcy raised the lid gently. Carefully, my lord, Master Sean said in a warning voice. He's got a spell on the thing. Let me do it. He made Lord Darcy stand back and then lifted the lid of the heavy trunk himself. When it was leaning back against the wall, gaping open widely on its hinges, Master Sean took a long look at the trunk and its lid without touching either of them. There was a second lid on the trunk, a thin one obviously operated by a simple bolt. Master Sean took his sorcerer's staff, a 5-foot heavy rod made of the wood of the quicken tree or mountain ash, and touched the inner lid. Nothing happened. He touched the bolt. Nothing. Master Sean murmured thoughtfully. He glanced around the room and his eyes fell on a heavy stone doorstep. That ought to do it. He walked over, picked it up, and carried it back to the chest. Then he put it on the rim of the chest in such a position that if the lid were to fall, it would be stopped by the doorstop. Then he put his hand in, as if to lift the inner lid. The heavy outer lid swung forward and down of its own accord, moving with blurring speed, and slammed viciously against the doorstop. Lord Darcy massaged his right wrist gently, as if he felt where the lid would have hit if he had tried to open the inner lid. Triggered to slam if a human being sticks a hand in there, eh? Or a head, my lord. Not very effectual if you know what to look for. There are better spells than that for guarding things. Now we'll see what his lordship wants to protect so badly that he practices sorcery without a license. He lifted the lid again and then opened the inner lid. It's safe now, my lord. Look at this. Lord Darcy had already seen. Both men looked in silence at the collection of paraphernalia on the first tray of the chest. Master Sean's busy fingers carefully opened the tissue paper packing of one after another of the objects. A human skull, he said. Bottles of graveyard earth. This one is labelled Virgin's Blood. And this? A hand of glory. It was a mummified human hand, stiff and dry and brown, with the fingers partially curled as though they were holding an invisible ball, 3 inches or so in diameter. On each of the fingertips was a short candle stub. When the hand was placed on its back, it would act as a candelabra. That pretty much settles it, eh, Master Sean? Lord Darcy said. Indeed, my lord. At the very least we can get him for possession of materials. Black magic is a matter of symbolism and intent. Very well. I want a complete list of the contents of that chest. Be sure to replace everything as it was and relock the trunk. He tugged thoughtfully at an earlobe. So Laird Duncan has the talent, eh? Interesting. Aye, but not surprising, my lord, said Master Sean without looking up from his work. It's in the blood. Some attribute it to the Danannans who passed through Scotland before they conquered Ireland 3,000 years ago. But however that may be, the talent runs strong in the sons of Gael. It makes me boil to see it misused. While Master Sean talked, Lord Darcy was prowling around the room, reminding one of a lean tomcat who was certain that there was a mouse concealed somewhere. "It'll make Laird Duncan boil if he isn't stopped," Lord Darcy murmured absently. "Aye, my lord," said Master Sean. "The mental state necessary to use the talent for black sorcery is such that it invariably destroys the user. But if he knows what he's doing, a lot of other people are hurt before he finally gets his." Lord Darcy opened the jewel box on the dresser. The usual travelling jewellery. Enough, but not a great choice. "A man's mind turns in on itself when he's taken up with hatred and thoughts of revenge," Master Sean droned on. "Or if he's the type who enjoys watching others suffer, or the type who doesn't care but is willing to do anything for gain, then his mind is already warped, and the misuse of the talent just makes it worse." Lord Darcy found what he was looking for in a drawer, just underneath some neatly folded lingerie. A small holster, beautifully made of Florentine leather, gilded and tooled. He didn't need Master Sean's sorcery to tell him that the little pistol fitted like a hand in a glove.